Hello and welcome to the next part of my Super Monkey Ball review marathon, where today we're taking a look at the 6th main game released in the series, as well as the last game to be released on 6th generation hardware. That game is none other than Super Monkey Ball Adventure. And let me tell you, from what I've heard about this one, I'm not looking forward to this. Super Monkey Ball Adventure is perhaps the strangest game released in the entire series, and this is because it features a completely unique story mode, which rather than consisting of a series of obstacle courses which need to be completed with timing, balance and skill, it actually features a more openly designed structure, more similar to what you would find in a 3D collect-a-thon platformer. The developer for this game actually isn't a subsidiary of Sega either, making it the first Super Monkey Ball game to not be developed in-house, and rather it was developed by Traveller's Tales. No doubt you've probably heard of this company, they're pretty widely known at this point and were responsible for games like A Bug's Life, Toy Story 2, Crash Bandicoot The Wrath of Cortex, and since 2009 they've exclusively been developing all of the LEGO games. They have a very varied history with game development, with games like Toy Story 2 being held in pretty high regard, but then they also developed games like Rascal, which, well, let's just say isn't held in high regard. So the question here is Super Monkey Ball Adventure one of Traveller's Tales' hidden gems, or is it one of the stinkers? Well, let's find out together. Seeing as the main mode here is the story mode, let's start by taking a look at that. The story here is that I and friends are having a good time, barbecuing some bananas, when their island's alarm bell rings out, forcing the team to jump into action and investigate. The king of the island tells them that sorrow is starting to take over the 5 realms and monsters have started to appear because of it. After a bit of investigation, it turns out that the sorrow has been instigated by the Prince of Monkeytropolis and the Princess of Congrilla wanting to marry. But the realms aren't at peace, so the marriage wouldn't be allowed. The rest of the game then becomes about uniting all of the realms and spreading joy to rid the world of sorrow and therefore the monsters, and put on a ceremony for the prince and princess's wedding. You know what? I actually really like this setup. I find it pretty interesting how instead of taking an easy route and bringing back Dr. Bad Boon or creating another villain, there just straight up isn't a main bad guy, and it's more just about the politics of the different areas you visit. There's quite a lot of subplots going on here too. For example, in Moonhaven, the smaller monkeys, called Little Uns in the game, are being looked down on by the bigger monkeys and not given any responsibility despite being capable. And this section concludes with the big monkeys needing the little uns' help, thus proving their worth in society. Then there's Zootopia, which is a theme park run by an overseer called Fat Cat, who won't let anyone leave the park until they've had enough fun. This causes people to be trapped for months, becoming more and more unhappy, making it impossible to leave. It turns out Fat Cat is a robot who isn't properly doing its job because you can't program emotions, so it simply doesn't understand that everyone wants to leave. It's actually pretty cool stuff, and I found each of the worlds really interesting because of all of this background detail. Super Monkey Ball isn't the sort of game you would normally associate with having detailed lore, but this game actually presents a really fleshed out universe. Before we carry on here, now's probably a good time to point out that I am playing the GameCube version of this game. The reason for this is that I anticipated that the controls, graphics and frame rate would be better in this version, just like they were going from Super Monkey Ball Deluxe for the PS2 to the GameCube ones. However, it would appear that the different ports of Adventure all have positives over the other ones, meaning that there's no one definitive version of the game. The GameCube port's main advantage appears to be that the loading is better, simply being able to roll from one area to another, viewing a standard loading screen in between. Whereas the PS2 version has this weird mechanic where you need to rotate a machine to open up the next area, which was done to mask the loading that needed to be done in the background to make the next area appear. The PS2 version has some better animations in cutscenes, as well as cases of having better texture quality in some areas. There was even a PSP version which has an exclusive minigame called Monkey Trumps, and you could collect cards in the story mode to expand your deck for use in this minigame. The PSP version actually had some exclusive levels in the challenge mode too, as well as a special NPC in the story mode called the Mysterious Traveller, who gives you some extremely detailed lore about the previous games in the series, talking about the origins of Dr. Bad Boon, how Gongon used to be a pirate who stole all of the bananas from Jungle Island, and a lot more. This is all cool stuff because it basically solidifies all of the bits of story we had from the previous games and greatly expands on it too. If you want to know the whole story, I'll leave a link down below where you can read all about it. So with all of that out of the way, how does the game actually play? The controls are exactly the same as a standard Super Monkey Ball game. You tilt the world around you to move the ball and explore the various levels. With this being more of an adventure game though, there's quite a lot more going on. The basic structure has you exploring each level, finding NPCs and completing missions set by them. If you've ever played any of the Tony Hawk games from Pro Skater 4 onwards, it's pretty much exactly like that. These missions can actually be really interesting, having to put on a magic show for an audience, defeat weeds that are spreading through Jungle Island, fly across the sea destroying speakers, and loads more. The variety here is through the roof, and while there are some missions that are recycled, they never really become repetitive due to the levels being designed so differently. However, some missions are extremely tedious and annoying, and this is basically where my frustration with the game begins. While some missions are fun and engaging, I would say maybe 60% of them are the exact opposite, being so annoying that it makes you want to give up and throw the game into the goddamn sea. The ones where you need to find a number of red balloons are utter rubbish because you can only carry one balloon at a time and you need to take them all the way back to an NPC who is miles away, one by one, despite most of the balloons being right next to each other. It's a waste of time. Why put the balloons next to each other and force you to go backwards and forwards? It's not even a test of skill at that point, because if you can get the first balloon, you can obviously get to that location, so why make you do it again? Then we have these sticky ball levels where you gain the ability to roll up various surfaces and go upside down and stuff. It's a really interesting idea and could have worked well, but you move so goddamn slowly, and the way these bits are designed is like a maze, having you constantly get to dead ends and then have to slowly walk back on yourself, and not only that, the ball sometimes just straight up loses its stickiness for no reason and has you fall off the stage and die and fail the mission. Now, failing the mission probably isn't that much of a big deal, right? You can just have another go by pausing the game and pressing retry just like in the Tony Hawk games, surely. No, of course you can't do that. So here's the issue, and this is potentially the absolute biggest problem with the game. If you fail a mission, and believe me, you will fail a lot of missions, you have to go all the way back to the NPC and talk to them again in order to retry. Bear in mind that some of these missions have you go to the other side of an area, and these areas can be really big, so already that's pretty annoying. But if you fail a mission by falling, you'll be respawned in the most random locations that could be even further away from the NPC than what you were when you fell off. Honestly, the respawning in this game makes no sense. It should have just placed you back where you were when you fell off, and it shouldn't have made you fail the objective you're on either. And even if it does make you fail, you should have been able to just retry the objective from the pause screen. You might think I'm making a bigger deal of this than I need to, but seriously, I would say about half of the time I spent playing this game was just failing a mission and then making my way back to give it another go. On top of this rubbish is the fact that some of these areas are really badly designed. I mean, to be honest, there's only really one level that's extremely bad, but that's enough to make you want to stop playing. This level is Moonhaven. It's this steampunk floating machine that's powered by air, water and fire, and its actual visual design and theming is really cool. The issue is that it's so difficult navigating your way around. Each area is like a maze, and the way you progress through the level makes it so you can't go back to a previous area without looping all the way around the entire level again. So if you miss something in a previous area, you need to go through all of the other areas again to give certain objectives another try. Adding to the frustration is that this level is not only a maze, but it's filled to the brim with obstacles, like these flying sections, jumping sections, sections where air will blast you off of platforms, bits where you need to float on water to make it across gaps, and way more. It's a chore to get through, and I cannot understate my absolute hatred of this entire level. There's also a massive issue with the game not giving you enough information about what you need to do or where you need to go. Throughout the game you unlock various abilities which you activate by chanting, kinda like the songs you learn in Ocarina of Time. These abilities range from being extremely context sensitive and barely utilised, making them pointless, like for example the tether ball, which allows you to pick stuff up and move them, or the speed ball, which literally just makes you move a bit quicker and is used twice in the entire game. But then we've got the few abilities like the wood ball, which allows you to float on water as well as set yourself on fire, and the hover ball, which allows you to fly and get extra height, which are actually extremely useful. But the catch here is that the hover ball, which is easily the most useful ability in the game, is unlocked almost at the end of the game, making it feel kind of redundant because at that point you'll have almost done everything anyway. My point here is that while unlocking these new abilities is actually a really good idea, and some of them actually have an impact on how you traverse levels, the issue is that certain missions will require one of these abilities, but the game doesn't tell you that you'll need an ability beforehand, making it so you'll be trying to do the objective and be failing because you don't know that you need an ability for it. Either that, or you'll already have the ability but you just won't know that you need to use it, or you'll try and do the objective without the ability and be able to do it but make things a million times more difficult for yourself, which ends up making you feel like the game just isn't working properly. Like here, I couldn't get to this photographer NPC and I didn't know that you unlocked the hoverball ability later in the game, which would have easily allowed me to get to him. So I spent ages rolling around basically trying to cheese my way up to him. I eventually found that by using this cannon I could fly over to him, but this obviously isn't the intended way to do it. Then he gives you an objective to get to a marker placed in the sea. At this point I didn't know that you unlocked the ability to float with wood ball, so I did some really risky manoeuvring to get to it, not knowing that that isn't what you're supposed to do, and of course, remember, if you die doing this, you'll have to make your way to the NPC all over again because you don't respawn at the NPC and you can't retry objectives from the pause screen. Then there's issues where you're doing objectives right, but because you're not given enough information about what you're doing, you begin doubting yourself and end up doing them wrong. Like here, where you're told to climb to the top of a building using sticky ball, you do that and get to the top of the building, but nothing happens. What you actually need to do is go back down the other side of the building using sticky ball, but you literally aren't told to do this. I thought something was wrong and the objective just didn't register as cleared or something. There's also issues with the enemies and certain parts where you need to progress the story where you aren't told what to do either. There aren't too many enemies in the game to be honest, but they're such a goddamn pain to beat, and the reason for this is because you straight up are never told what to do to beat them. I had to look up a guide just to beat the most basic enemies. Like, how am I supposed to know that when these enemies swallow you, you need to have the scalar ball ability active and make yourself bigger in the mouth to make them explode from the inside? Or here, I figured that you needed to use the boxing ball ability to hit this enemy who punches you, but it wasn't doing anything. So it turns out you need to wait for him to lift up both of his arms and then hit him, which you may think is obvious. But what isn't so obvious is that you need to do this 3 times. Also, this stupid black and white filter appears on the screen every time you get near an enemy, and it's just so ugly. I have no idea why they chose to do this. It would have looked so much better if the screen just stayed normal. Then we have bits like here where you've cleared all of the objectives in a level and there will be a cutscene where II says some things need to be put right, but he doesn't say what or where these things are, resulting in you backtracking all over the place to find 2 random objectives that have now appeared that really have no relevance to anything. Honestly, I could go through so many more examples of the game not properly telling you what you're supposed to be doing. The entire game ends up feeling like you can't trust it, and you have to read between the lines of every single bit of dialogue just to understand the objectives properly. It's irritating because there's real elements of greatness here. I love some of the smaller details, like how you collect bananas and can spend them in a shop in each level to unlock more content for the minigames, as well as other characters to play as in the minigames too. The graphics, in my opinion, are actually really great, and the visual design of each level is so goddamn interesting and varied. There's even some awesome attention to detail, like with how grass will be flattened behind you as you roll over it, and all of these spoof posters for films in the city level. The frame rate is actually really solid and it runs at 60 frames per second. The controls are great and responsive, you can play as any of the 4 main characters in the story mode, which is nice. The story itself is really fleshed out and packed with interesting lore. I love how the old minigames are referenced, with you being able to fly in certain sections like in Monkey Target, and the boxing ball ability is taken from Monkey Fight. I also really like the way they implemented the normal Super Monkey Ball levels into the story mode by having these locked gates which need to be unlocked by clearing challenge mode stages. There's so much to love about this game, and just the basic idea of a proper adventure mode in a Super Monkey Ball game is a really cool concept. It's just so heavily let down by both big and little issues, like constantly having to access the pause menu to view your chance to activate abilities because there's no way you'll memorize them all. And this really just interrupts the flow of the game. It should have just displayed all of the different chants when you opened up the chant mode, just for ease of use. It doesn't give you enough information about where you need to go, what to do for certain objectives, or if you need a new ability or not. Levels can be far too big and maze-like, and a fast travel option to revisit the different areas would have been great. Some missions are absolutely infuriating with them being so long and failing the mission if you die, having no checkpoints, and not even allow you to easily retry them either. This mission where you need to climb to the top of Fat Cat's tower is the prime example of why this game is so bad. It's long, you aren't told exactly what you're doing, the sticky ball will just sometimes drop you for no reason. There's no checkpoints, it's a maze, and it's filled with difficult obstacles. It's a horrible experience to go through, believe me. It's a real mess of a game, and it's such a shame because with a little bit of tweaking and fine-tuning, this could have been something really special. You can almost see a pearl of a game here, but it's covered in a ton of crap. Plus, when I got near the very end of the game, I think my disc became possessed, because all of the sound files started playing in the background, but they were really distorted and messed up.
Ready, go, 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 go! Hurry up, go, 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 go! Time over!
So I bet you're wondering how the game ends. All this time you've been spreading the message of the wedding of the Prince and Princess of Monkeytropolis and Congrilla, right? But it turns out that the inhabitants of these two places think that each other are monsters and hate each other. In actuality though, it's a misunderstanding and they've been fighting each other under false pretenses. Because of Ai and the gang spreading so much joy, they finally make friends and agree to the wedding. You travel back to Jungle Island and everyone you've helped along the way celebrates as the two are wed. There's also a 100% ending where it turns out that the monkey who's been teaching you all of the powers throughout the game is actually Ai from the future, and Baby is also from the future too. This is mentioned in the manual for Super Monkey Ball 2, so Adventure makes this tidbit of information fully canon, which is nice. Time travel, it turns out, is actually a pretty big thing in the Super Monkey Ball story. In fact, even Dr. Bad Boon travelled back in time to the events that take place in Super Monkey Ball 2. So yeah, this actually isn't as out of the blue as it seems. Future Ai tells the gang that he gifted them with the ball ability after developing it with Gongon in the future, and takes it away from them, saying that they have to create the ability for themselves. Otherwise, I guess it would create a time paradox and the universe would implode. He leaves with Baby after saying he's proud of them all for saving the day, and that's that. If you're wondering why I didn't show any of that, it's because I've not got 100% myself. I got 86% and that took long enough, but I thought I would mention all of that anyway because it's actually a pretty big plot twist. Future II even becomes a playable character if you 100% the game in the PSP version, and then he can be transferred to the PS2 version as well. But he's completely inaccessible in the GameCube version, which is a bit of a shame. The reward for 100% completing the game in the PS2 and GameCube versions seems to just be accessing the cutscene where Future II reveals himself, so I'm not missing too much I don't already know about by not going for it. I would have said that this is maybe a slightly lame completion reward. However, because you unlock other characters and more content for the minigames from the shops throughout story mode, I think the unlockable content is actually pretty good here. Now you might think this whole thing is over, but no. As with the other Super Monkey Ball games, there's quite a lot more content for us to dive into. So, let's start by taking a look at the challenge mode. First off, the challenge mode works a bit differently to how it did in the previous games. Instead of having all 3 difficulties unlocked from the start, you actually need to clear the easier ones to unlock the harder ones, which I think is a nice touch. I'm actually a little bit surprised that it didn't work like this in the original games, to be honest. There's also far fewer levels featured here, having 49 in total, but I guess with the story mode obviously being the main focus this time around, this is understandable. I feel like if this game would have had maybe 100 normal stages, it's possible people would like it a bit more because it would feel like the standard Monkey Ball gameplay was more of a focus. But yeah, there's only 49. The stages themselves are visually based off of the areas from the story mode, and they look pretty nice. They also control quite well, being slightly looser than the original 2 games, but still solid enough to have a good time. One thing I actually think is really good in this game, and perhaps even better than what it was in the original games, is the animation of the monkeys in the ball. I love how they look when they're moving fast, going into a sprinting animation, and how when you slow down, they go into a skidding animation. It looks pretty cool, and I'm a fan. You know what, the stages themselves are actually pretty damn good as well. Some of them offer a good amount of challenge and are imaginatively designed, feeling just like they could have been in the older games. But some of them feel a little bit cheap. The ones I'm primarily talking about here are the ones where the entire level is spinning and it makes the camera go a bit weird, which to be fair did happen occasionally in Super Monkey Ball 2, but still. It feels a little bit less forgivable here with the game having so few levels, and there's a fair amount of them that do this too. There's also quite a lot of levels that use this checkerboard gimmick, where you need to go diagonally across square platforms with holes next to each platform. Why they chose to use the same gimmicks multiple times when there's not that many levels to begin with is beyond me, but the majority of these levels are actually really good. I think they could be considered pretty difficult, but I didn't have too much trouble with any of them. I cleared beginner and advanced on my first try, and expert on my second try. The reason for the pretty steep difficulty curve is obviously because there aren't that many levels and they didn't want the game to be a breeze. So I would say more than half of them require a fair bit of skill to get past. It never becomes quite as difficult as some of the levels from Super Monkey Ball 1 and 2 though. You can tell this mode doesn't have as much effort put into it as the other modes in the game, which is a bit of a shame. The continue screen is just pitch black with basic text on it rather than having the monkey sulking under a spotlight like in the original games. The music used in these levels is literally the same tracks from Super Monkey Ball 2. You can't move the camera freely despite being able to do that in the story mode of the game. And there's no practice mode, which is a bit bad because if you were struggling with a level, there would be no easy way to keep trying it without finding it in story mode where you have infinite attempts. But it would be a bit of a pain to go through all of that just to practice one stage. You also don't unlock anything for completing the expert mode, which is a bit odd. They could have given you an extra playable character for the minigames, or just something at the very least. One thing I do like is that the narrator now has different voice samples for when he says go and fallout, just to give the audio a little bit more variety.
Ready? Go! Ready? Go! Fall out! Fall out!
Something else which I appreciate is the way that there's a leaderboard which displays all of your times and your scores for each individual level. That's actually really cool, and I don't think the originals have anything like this. You could save your replays which registers your time and score, but there's no big list with all of them displayed like this. Overall though, even with the slight lack of attention to detail with this mode, it's still a good distraction from the main game, and at least the option of playing normal Monkey Ball is here, even if it is much more short-lived than in the other games. The final bit of content we've got left to talk about is the minigames, and once again, these are all playable in multiplayer. It's a bit of a shame there's no other multiplayer elements to this game. For example, the challenge mode is no longer playable in multiplayer, and there's no multiplayer element to the story mode, but hey, at least we've got something. There's 6 minigames featured in Adventure, which feels like a bit of a downgrade coming from Super Monkey Ball 2, which had 12 of them. Something brand new this game introduces though, which I've already mentioned a little bit in the review, is more playable characters. Unfortunately, these are only accessible in the minigames and not in the challenge mode or story mode, which would have been incredible, but it's still really cool and incentivizes going through the story mode and buying them from the shop with your bananas. There's also some extra content that you can purchase for the minigames in the shop too, which is great. The shop pretty much replaces the playpoint system, and for the format this game uses, I think that was a good choice. Anyway, 3 of the minigames are ones we've seen before, these being Monkey Race, Monkey Fight, and of course, Monkey Target. I'm not going to go into too much information about these because I've already covered them in the older videos, so check them out if you're interested in my thoughts on these. The new minigames are Monkey Bounce, which is where you need to jump around on a grid and make squares on the floor your own colour or design. The player with the most squares then wins the round. What makes this more hectic and fun is when people get the power-ups and cause a bit of chaos. Making everyone small so they can't colour in squares, freezing them in place so they're stuck in mid-air, or getting a magnet power which shoves everybody away from you are just some of the powers you can get. It's actually a pretty good minigame and I enjoyed it. Monkey Cannon is a bit of a weird one. It kinda works like a 3D Angry Birds game where you need to shoot a cannon at an opposing player's tower, and the more bricks you knock off, the more points you get. An element of tactics is introduced in the way that you need to change which of the 3 enemy towers you're aiming at depending on how unstable the bricks are. Like, you could focus on blasting one particular tower to try and dislodge bricks yourself, or you could go to a tower another player is aiming at and attempt to steal the points after they've made the bricks unstable. I kinda wish there was a way of defending your own tower, but there's no function to do that. I feel like that would have made it potentially even more skill based, but still, it's another pretty good one. Monkey Tag is probably the best of the new minigames, and I actually really enjoyed this one. It's set on a Super Mario Galaxy style world which you roll around on, and the objective is to pop as many balloons as possible before your opponent gets to them first. You have some weapons like banana skins which shoot forward and give you points if you hit somebody with them, and bombs which blast opponents away to the other side of the planet. It's pretty tense and it gets hectic when the black balloons start appearing that take off a lot of your score if you hit into them, and adding to this tension is the fact that more regular balloons will start spawning as the match goes on as well. Overall, the minigames here are pretty great. The 3 returning ones are good choices, and the 3 new ones would have fit in nicely with the selection of minigames from Super Monkey Ball 2. Plus, the addition of more playable characters and unlockable stages for some of the minigames is an awesome bonus and a good incentive to complete the story mode of the game too. So to wrap things up, is Super Monkey Ball Adventure a bad game? Well, yeah it is. However, it's not so bad that I would outright say you shouldn't play it, because honestly, there's a hell of a lot to love here. Even just the fact that there's a challenge mode and minigames to play outside of the main mode is pretty great, because they could have just had the story mode and then called it a day. I think the developers really cared about this and tried to do the best with a premise that the series hadn't yet attempted. The story mode is obviously the main part of the game, and it's such a shame that there's so many pretty substantial problems that end up being difficult to look past. Even if the game had just made it so that you could retry objectives from the pause menu, I feel like it would have been instantly so much better. I mean, obviously even if that one issue was fixed, there would still be many other problems, but it would have been so much better even just with that one fix. So with everything about the game in mind, here is my ranking of all of the games we've covered in the Super Monkey Ball series so far. Yeah, you're seeing this right. I don't think Super Monkey Ball Adventure is the worst game in the series. In fact, it's not even the second worst. Now, I don't want it to come across like I absolutely despise Banana Blitz HD, because I really don't. But I honestly feel like the level designs in that game are pretty uninspired, and there's a lack of content outside of the main mode of the game. Plus the boss battles put me off even wanting to give it another go, to be honest, because I really don't like them. Plus, I don't think you should be able to jump in a Super Monkey Ball game, because it kind of ruins the whole skill-based maneuvers that you're capable of doing without a jump. Of course, Adventure is also heavily flawed, but it also has some really big positives too, and I think most people look over these positives, which is a shame. This is nowhere near as bad as people make out, and if you've not played it for a while, I would actually urge you to give it another chance. Maybe use a guide to help you along the way though, because it would make it a lot more enjoyable. The only reason Junior is worse than Adventure is kind of simply due to the fact that it's a Game Boy Advance game, as well as being mostly the same as Super Monkey Ball 1. And obviously, the best way to experience the levels from that game is by just playing the original game, so it kinda makes Junior not worth playing unless you're a really big fan of the series. While I have been pretty positive towards this game, don't let that make you think that this game didn't piss me the hell off. There were a lot of times where I was so frustrated with this game and I wanted to give up and stop playing. I think the thing that really started to help me and made me stop feeling like that was when I looked up a guide which more clearly laid out what I was supposed to be doing. Even then there were plenty of annoying missions, but just having that extra bit of guidance made it a lot more enjoyable. So if you're the sort of person who has patience and can put up with a game that's heavily flawed, I would say this game is worth a try. It's a very interesting idea that's badly executed, but the good elements are still present if you dig a bit. For someone who doesn't have patience or doesn't want to put up with a bad game to see the gold within, I would say definitely don't play this though. Something I would like to do at this point in the video is point out that in my last review of Super Monkey Ball Jr., I made fun of the game's box for being poorly printed and having grammatical errors on the back. Well, it appears this might not be true, and I've got a dodgy copy of the game with a fake case. The reason for this is that I can't find any other cases on the internet that look the same as mine, so yeah, that's a mistake on my end. So I guess maybe just ignore that part of the previous video. But even so, whoever made this fake case could have proofread the back of it, surely. Anyway, next in my Super Monkey Ball review marathon, we're going to be moving on to the 7th generation of consoles by taking a look at Super Monkey Ball Banana Blitz for the Wii. It might seem a bit weird that I'm covering this, considering I've already covered the HD version, but it turns out that there's quite a few differences between the two versions that make this worth covering in its own video. So if you enjoyed this review, give it a like and leave a comment down below letting me know how stupid I am for not hating Super Monkey Ball Adventure, and maybe subscribe to see more stuff like this coming soon. And until the next video, bye!